spoiler for the end of the session. So shall I kick it off?
Yes, please, Barbara, over to you.
All right. So today we're going to talk about, let me just check real quickly. I need to open this because I hear a lot of background noises. Someone has their Windows sounds on. Okay, so what we're going to do today for this session, we're going to look into how you can get started with automating Azure and how the portal can actually help you with that. So let's say that you're already familiar with Azure, you know your ways around the resources, and you've built a lot of resources and you want to start automating things. This can be a bit daunting to see what are we going to look at, what options do I have. So I want to give a quick introduction and a practical guide on how you can get started for yourself. My name is Barbara Forbes. I am an IT consultant working in the Netherlands for SCCT. I am an Azure MVP and a Microsoft certified trainer. My blog is on the top right. It's called Forbes with a 4.nl, and there you can find everything about Azure and automation. And my Twitter handle is BA4BES, which is also my GitHub handle. So that's how you can find me. And yeah, there we go. So what we're going to talk about today, quick agenda. First, we're going to look into how you can get started with Azure PowerShell. Then a quick introduction on Azure CLI. We will look at Cloud Shell, and in the end, we will talk about ARM templates. As I said, this is going to be very practical, a lot of demos. I really want to show you how you can start for yourself with all these awesome tools that can help you with your automation. Before we get started, first a little bit of theory. What we're doing today is infrastructure as code. I just want to make that clear. Often people think of infrastructure as code like if you have big ARM templates and everything is automated and you don't have to do anything by hand and you never have to touch a mouse, to say it like that. But infrastructure as code is creating resources, but it's also changing resources, and it's managing resources, deleting resources. If you're managing infrastructure and you're using code, yeah, in my opinion, you are using infrastructure as code. This does not mean that your complete environment needs to be automated. I have yet to find an environment where every single detail is automated. It's very hard to get to that place. So what you do is you take your baby steps, to say it like that. You start automating stuff. What I personally always like to do, I document the process of how to do something, how to create something, or how to manage something. And then I try to automate the documentation. So my end goal is to have no documentation at all if everything is automated, to say it like that. But don't worry if you don't get there at the first start. If you're waiting to automate everything, you're never going to get there. So just to get that out of the way, one thing that's also important to know with automation and infrastructure as code is that you have the two different kinds, imperative code and declarative code. Imperative code is the code where you describe the process that needs to be taken to get to a certain end goal. This is what you do with PowerShell, with Azure CLI. You describe the process. So for example, for a virtual machine, you would describe that you would need that it would have to create a network interface, and it had to create maybe a public IP address, and then finally create that virtual machine. You describe that process. With declarative code, you describe that end goal. So you have a bunch of code that shows this is what I want to have in the end. And then you have some framework around it that takes care of the journey for you. So you just have to know what you want to have in the end. So that's two different ways of working. There's not one better than the other. It's mostly a personal preference. But these are the two ways of infrastructure as code that we're going to talk about today. And the first thing I want to show you, if you consider using the portal to make this journey a little easier, I want to consider the categories that are in Azure, because I found them come back with most forms of infrastructure as code. So let's take the portal Is this my window? Yes, this is the one. So here I have my Azure portal. And if I click the three dots here, the hamburger menu, and I go to all resources, no, not all resources, excuse me, all services. Here in the left, I see all different kind of categories. And now this is not completely consistent, but you can find these categories within every form of infrastructure as code, at least the three that we're going to talk about today. So if I would look at storage, I get all resources that have something to do with storage that fell under that category. If I go to networking, I find the virtual networks, which is the one you might think of first, but I also find load balancers and application gateways and firewalls, VPN connections. So a lot of different resources. And this can help you with structuring what kind of stuff you need for your own solution. This also helps to see how many resources are available in Azure. There's really a lot of choices, and to think of automating everything, that's a lot of stuff. So this can help a bit. I'm not done scrolling. Yeah, I'm done now. This can help a bit to get some structure into that thing that looks like it's really big. But now let's just focus, for example, on storage, focus on networking, and you can find your way a bit easier. And I will show you along this talk how those categories play a role. First thing we're going to talk about is PowerShell. With PowerShell, you have a module available to work with. And the module now is the AZ module. There used to be the Azure RM module, which is still available, but is now officially a legacy module. The end date has been announced, I think, in 2024. You should not be working with the Azure RM module at this point unless it's some kind of legacy. The AZ module has everything you need. And this is a big module which can help you manage pretty much every instance of Azure. With PowerShell, you will find that if you have a Windows background, then you will probably already have worked with PowerShell in one way or another. And as time goes by, you can find that there are more tasks that are not able to do in a GUI. So you could find it with Windows already, and now in Azure that there are some tasks that you cannot do in the portal. So you probably have touched PowerShell in one way or another. If you've worked with it while you were growing up, to say like in Windows, then it will become pretty intuitive to you. And what you can help you with PowerShell is to remember that it starts always with a verb. So an action to be taken, and then a noun which describes where you want to do that action to. And what I want to show you. Oh, first thing I want to show you, you can install this module simply with install module and then AZ. Then you get it from the PowerShell gallery. And then you can connect to your Azure. And that's the only video I have because I would have to scrub away so many email addresses. So yeah, I made a video of that one and I'll show it here. So how you connect to Azure, you simply use the commandlet connect AZ account. And when you put this, if you do this interactively, it will take you to your web browser and you can select the account you want to use. As you saw, I was connected with a lot of different accounts. This is the reason why it's a video. And this is it. I have now used that browser to log in, which also means that all kinds of security things can be taken care of, like conditional access or multi-factor authentication. That can all be taken care of in this way. So that's it. We're now connected to Azure. Now, what we're going to do in Azure, let's take a quick look. And I'll take the terminal. And first thing I wanted to show, let me just get the other screen ready here. First thing I wanted to show you is those categories coming back. And these are all the modules that are involved with the Azure module. So if you install Azure, so the AZ module, you get all these sub-modules. So you can find some of these categories we talked about. Here I see the storage category, the websites category. Here's the network category. So it's, like I said, it's not completely consistent, but this can help you a bit with structure your way of thinking. You do not need to look at this that much, because all the commandlets that are in here are loaded by default as soon as you load the AZ module. But it is good to know that this is playing around somewhere in the background. This can also help with realizing that sometimes there are a bit of inconsistencies in the commandlets. That's because there's a lot of teams working on this. These are a lot of resources that can be managed with PowerShell. So let's just get into it. What you can do with PowerShell is make use of autocomplete a lot. So let's say if I want to see the resource groups that are in my subscription, I would say get, because get is always the command to get information and not do anything, only get something. And for resource group, I would type RE and then press tab. And I did it too soon. Oh, no. It's early in the morning. I'm sorry. The first thing you always have to do is get and then AZ, because every commandlet starts with AZ to define that it's the AZ module. And now I can type that RE, and it can tab complete to some resource. Now, as you see, I typed a bit too soon, because I now get everything for recovery services. So let's type back, put the S in there. Get AZ resource, getting closer, and I tap again. There we go. Get Azure AZ resource group. I don't have to type any parameters. I can just press enter. And of course, I'm just going to close this off and start a new one real quickly. This is a bug I've been having on my computer. I need to check it at some point. And check if it works. Yeah, it's a bug on my computer. Don't worry. I'm just going to clean it up real quickly. Okay, and there we go. Sorry about that. And here I actually get a list of all my resource groups that are in my subscription. So I got that information. And as you could see, you could also do get AZ resource, and I get all the resources that are in my subscription, which are quite a few at this point. So I can get all these information this way. And as you see, I can here see, for example, those resource types. These are those categories again. This is in the storage category. And this is going to take a while. I have a lot of storage accounts in there. So this is in the storage category. So I can find those categories again. Let's say I want to create something new. So I want to create a new resource group. Then I just replace get with new. So I want to create something new. I select AZ resource again, and I tab complete again. And now I have new AZ resource group. Now I don't have to know all the commandlets that are in there. I can just push a dash, push tab, and it will show me what parameters it needs. So the resource group needs a name, which makes sense. So I'll call this example. I'll call this example 1 because we're going to have multiple examples. And if I dash again and tap again, it's going to need a location. Okay. Thing is, it can actually autocomplete that location for me. So I'm just going to try this because it's not working every time. I click a W and then tap complete. And this takes some time because there's a lot of locations. So it autocompleted to West Central US, which is nice, but I live in West Europe. So that's what I wanted. I tap complete again. And here I get that location. So if I press enter now, I now have that resource group. It has been created. And I can find out if it's still there. So I use get again and then name example 1. Let's see if I can collect it. And there we go. I get the information on that resource group example 1. Now let's put something into that resource group. And what I want to create is a storage account. And as you saw in my subscription, I have a lot of storage accounts. I deploy a lot of storage accounts, and we're going to create a few storage accounts during this talk. The reason for that is that a storage account does not require a lot of parameters, and they are very quick to deploy. So otherwise we would be staring at our screen waiting for that virtual machine to be ready. So this is a bit quicker. So I start with new again and AZ, and I would guess for a storage account, you'd start with store, and there you go, new AZ storage account. This also helps that account is very early in the alphabetical roll. It goes through all the commandlets in alphabetical order. So this is the first one to show. And I can again check what information it needs. First, it needs to know in what resource group I want to create a storage account. So I will use example 1. And if I tap again, it asks for a name. And a storage account name, that's the one downside of a storage account. They have very strict naming conventions. You can only use lowercase letters or numbers, nothing else. Maximum of 24, and they need to be globally unique. So for these talks, mostly my names are for the storage account are like this, and I pray that it's unique. And if I tap complete again, it asks me for a SKU name. And the SKU is the size of the storage account. Pretty much, it's not completely the size, but you could say it like that. It says something about the replication that the storage account has. And here I can use tab complete again. And I always pick standard LRS because I'm not actually going to use this storage account, and this is the cheapest option. And I am now done. Oh, no, I'm almost done. And this is also very helpful if you look at looking to that PowerShell commandlet. I forgot a mandatory parameter, and it fixes it for me. It asks me, did you want to mention a location? Because we need a location. So it will always tell me which parameters are mandatory that way. So I put this in West Europe again, and I press enter, and it will start deploying that storage account for me. And we will see how fast Azure is going. It can depend a bit on how busy the portal is. And there we go. Okay, this is normally a better interface, but I zoomed in like crazy, so that that wrecked it a bit. Normally this looks a bit cleaner, but I zoomed in a lot to make this a bit more visible. So now let's look at my resource groups. And here I have the resource group example 1. And the portal actually often takes a little longer to display the resource when it's already there. There it is. I think that feels kind of cool because I feel like I'm faster than the portal, and that actually feels like an accomplishment, which it is not. But here is the storage account I just created. So we are now creating infrastructure as code. Now, one thing that can help you out, I mean, I can go through these parameters and know what they mean because I have a lot of experience with PowerShell. But if this example is new for you and you don't know what are the parameters or what you should fill in, you can use get help for every commandlet that's in there. So if I take AZ storage account and I want to know how it works, I can type get help in front of it. And it gives me information on that commandlet. So it tells us what it does. It gives us the syntax. So in the syntax here, I can see what parameters it needs, resource group name, and it needs to be a string. And that kind of stuff. I can see the name, I can see the SKU. Oh, I did get storage account. For get storage account, it tells me what I can enter a resource name and I can enter the name and that kind of stuff. It gives a small description what it does. And my favorite thing, you can add example after it. And it would give you examples of how you can use the commandlet. So what you would actually need to fill in. And get storage account only gets information, and it gets a bit more complicated when you have to create stuff. So if I do this for new storage account, you see I have a lot of parameters I could use that I didn't have to use, but I could use. But I can also see here with the SKU name what options I would have had. So it shows those options, gives some information. If you do not find this very readable, you can also just type new AZ storage account into your favorite search engine in the browser, and you can view the Microsoft Docs. It's a bit more viewable, to say it like that. It's a bit better layout. So you could choose to use that as well. And here you can also use examples to find out all the different options there are. So there's a lot of things that can help you out. In this one and with all the other one, you need to find out what you are actually doing. So I do recommend getting into the theory a bit, but I believe this is a great way to get started, to find out it's not all that scary, to say it like that. It's very usable, and to get your first hand-on experience. Do this in a development environment before you do this in production, by the way, but that goes for all playing around that we do like this. So that was the PowerShell section. And we're gonna look now at the Azure CLI. And what I have found, what people have told me, is that they often, the Azure CLI feels more intuitive for people who have a Linux background, because it's really based on Bash. And if you're used to that, then the Azure CLI will be more intuitive. They fit nicely next to each other. They have pretty much the same options and the same possibilities. So you can use either of them and find out what works for you best. And you can even combine them in the same script. You can just call the Azure CLI from PowerShell. And I recommend finding out what works best for you, what fits your personal preference the best. There's no right or wrong answer.
There's no right or wrong answer.
So let's look here. If I press just AZ, it shows you the Azure CLI with cool little ASCII art above it. And with AZ, you can call the Azure CLI. And if we look here, and I'm gonna zoom a little bit out to make it a little bit more readable. Take that back in a second. Here I find all these categories again that we talked about before. So here is storage, and here is network. So all those categories that we talked about before, you can find them here again. They're not completely the same. There are some differences, but this can still help you find your way with what you want to reach. And with the Azure CLI, you actually make use of these categories because you create your commands by going through them. And if I look at an example, I want to show those resource groups again. My first thought would be that would be under resource group, to show a resource group. But if I scroll down there, I find there's also only resource and not resource group. So my second guess would be it would be just group. Maybe it's under group instead of resource group. And here I can find AZ group. So what I can do now, and I'll zoom back a bit, is do AZ group. And I can use -h or --help, but -h is shorter. And when I do that, it will show me the different options that are available. And it shows me that I need to upgrade the Azure CLI, but I'll do that later. So here I have some commands available, and these are a bit like the PowerShell command, the PowerShell verbs, except they're a bit different because they are two different systems, but they do the same thing. So we have create, delete, show, list, stuff like that. So with list, I can get a list of all resource groups. So let's try that out. Okay. I've waited too long. I'm sorry, I don't use the laptop too much. I'll do this outside of the screen. And ooh, almost got all my email addresses in the bill. Yep. Well, it's interesting to see now, as you can see, I did the same thing. So let's make use of it that it did that accident. I did the same thing. I did AZ login. And then I could choose which email address I wanted to use, which account I wanted to use, and it logged me in. So I'm now logged in, which makes it easier, and go AZ group list. And I get a list of all the resource groups within that subscription. This is in a JSON format, where the other one was in PowerShell objects, which you obviously don't get from the AZ CLI. So I get JSON objects with all the information I need. So let's just see if I can now create a resource group again. So I'm still in AZ group. And if I press the H again here, I can see I have the option create. And that sounds like a helpful option. So I press create and now I'm lost again because I don't know what parameters it expects of me. Well, let's dash H again. And I'll zoom out a bit to make it readable. And here it shows AZ creates a new resource group and arguments that I can use. There's always a long version and a short version, double dash or one dash. And it says what is required is the name and the location of the resource group. So that's a lot like we just had in PowerShell. And it also has, which I really love, directly in there, the example, AZ group create L and then N. Okay, so let's see. I say AZ group create, L for location, which will be West Europe. And for the name, I will use example 2. And my resource group has now been created. And I get the resource group back as a JSON object. So like that, let's see if we can get to creating that storage account. And if I type AZ again to start with, I can find the syntax is storage. Guessing the account would be in there. So I'm just going to do AZ storage again and then an H, so it can tell me what it needs from me. And storage has a bunch of subcategories which you can use, so some subgroups to go with. And account is alphabetically the first, so account is at the top. So I can do AZ storage account, and I'm lost again, so I'm going to click H. And it tells me the commands that I can use. This is pretty cool. Actually, you can do this with PowerShell as well. As I said, the name needs to be globally unique, so you are able to use check name to see if the name is still available that you want to use. This can really help you out with error handling in your ARM or in your automation if you want to do this to a pipeline, for example, to make sure that the command will actually work before it's running. But for this one, you saw the beautiful names I create. I'm going to take the chance that the names are unique. And I'm going to use create again. So we were at AZ storage account and then create and the H again. And here you see, make it a bit smaller, there are actually a lot of parameters around or arguments around the storage account. But there's only a few of them that are actually required. So that saves us a lot of time. A lot of options here. It shows us all what it does. And in the end, I have my favorite thing, examples. So let's use one of those examples to get the right arguments. So it needs a name. And we'll do this. It needs a resource group where it will reside. So we created example 2. And it says kind here. No, the kind is fine. I think we can leave that out. We can use that location, which was West Europe, and we need the SKU. And I take this pretty much from the example here. So I've pressed enter there, and this will start running as it says, and in the end it will give that JSON display again. And with the AZ CLI, I have a lot less experience myself than with PowerShell because I have that Windows background, and I found that by working through it this way, this may not be the most efficient because I could have just Googled how to do it or use this from the start. But this does help to get a grip on what you are actually doing. And it is a fun way to find out what's happening and what options you have available. So this storage account has now been created. Let's just check here. We were at the resource groups, and I can refresh this, and I have the resource group example too. And here is that storage account. So we've now done two things through infrastructure as code. Okay, so I cannot talk about infrastructure as code or any of this stuff and the portal without mentioning Cloud Shell. So we're going to go to the Cloud Shell real quickly. This is a way to use all these tools, but then in the Azure portal, so in a web browser. Just, oh, yeah, there we go. Cloud Shell is available in the portal in this button. So this button is Cloud Shell, and it will be a way to call Commandless in the browser. So I've just a browser here. You have to connect it once. And while I have a terminal here, I can still use the portal. So I can still scroll to this on a small screen like this with a lot of zoom. This is a bit more difficult, but I can still use the portal while I'm working on this and see what I'm doing straight away. And I am authenticated directly because I'm already logged in to the portal. And here I can do that, get AZ resource group again. And I can use the AZ CLI again. So this is available as well. So I can do some quick work right here in the portal without having to worry about being authenticated or something like that, or having the right modules or having the right installation available. This is the PowerShell-based window. You also have a Bash-based window, and you also have some other tools available. You can use Terraform here. Should be working. You can use Git here. So you can, there's Git installed on it. So you can clone a repository here and run that scripts. You can use Puppet here. There's a lot of tools available that are by default installed. And one other real cool thing is that you can use a small version of Visual Studio Code here. So if I type code and I want to bring it up a bit to get a bit of space, here I can actually just write a script. So I can say write output hello world. I can say I want to save that. Save this as example.ps1. And I can close this editor, and now here I should be able, see example PS1, I can call that script and run it there, and it will stay stored there even if I log out. So if I have something I often have to do, I can create a script for it and have it in here. I don't even need to have an IDE or a computer where I can install something. I can do this on any computer I want. I can do it on kiosk computers. Don't know if you want to log into Azure in a kiosk computer, but yeah, if there's a panic and you need to work on it or you want to work on it, this is a really nice way to be able to do that. And this brings me to an example of how I made use of the Cloud Shell. This is me managing Azure from an iPad, which I thought was pretty impressive. So I could do everything, and with that keyboard, I had even had tab complete and stuff like that. And I will admit fully, I bought that keyboard, that crappy little Bluetooth keyboard, specifically to try to do this. And I did this, I made this photo, and I have never done this again. This is really an unpractical way of working, but I thought it was so cool that you are able to do that. Don't judge me, I was on a holiday and I was bored. So with now being started with Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI, I think now is a good time to start talking ARM templates, which is a declarative form of infrastructure as code. So you make a template that shows what you want to have created. ARM templates are built according to a JSON structure. And basically the structure is this, where the most important one is the resources. This is where you declare what resources you want to be created. And you can use variables and parameters to have more flexibility in there. Now, I'm not going to have time to completely explain how ARM templates works. Because ARM templates are a big thing to learn. But as I said, I love looking at examples. Like I did with the PowerShell, and I want to look at some examples. And I think this one, yeah. And here I have an example of an ARM template. No, I don't have 2 minutes. I'm doing a talk here. So here we have an example of course, a storage account. And the most important part is this part. And here are those categories, again, we talked about earlier. So this is part of Microsoft Storage, and it's a storage account. So you can find them in those ARM templates as well. And you have an API version, you have to define a name, a location, and a SKU, like we did in the Azure CLI and in Azure PowerShell. For this template, this is almost completely generated from, or this is completely from a GitHub repository that will show in a second. I made some small changes to it. And here I have a parameter that decides the name, and I have a variable that makes that name a unique string, so I don't have to worry too much about that. So I'll see if I can zoom in just a little bit. Well, still make and keep it readable. And if I want to deploy this ARM template, I can do so through PowerShell. I can do it in the portal. I can do it through Azure DevOps. I can do it through Azure CLI. Tons of ways to deploy this, so you can just pick your favorite. And I'm going to show PowerShell here. And first, I'm going to create a resource group for this again. The name will be example 3. We are always original like that. And the location will still be West Europe. So we have a resource group to work with. And now what we're going to use is Azure Resource Group Deployment. To do a resource group deployment, the first thing I need to find is the resource group name. And we just created that. That's example 3. And then I need to define the template file. And as you can see, I know this commandlet, so I'm typing out a lot more and not relying on the autocomplete at forehand, because there are a lot of parameters in here that I actually do not need, and I know the ones I need to have. So with template file, I can use the ARM template.json. And now I could define a parameter file, but I can also directly define the parameters I need here. And here I have a storage account prefix set up. So I just need a small string. So I can set demo and it will create the rest of the name for me. And if I click it like that, it now in the background starts creating that ARM template. And it starts creating that storage account based on this ARM template. And what I wanted to show you while we are waiting is one way, although it's not the portal. This is a very handy repository if you want to get started with ARM templates and you like looking at examples. This is an open source repository managed by the Azure. It's under the Azure team GitHub. And there are a lot of examples here, and I mean a lot. There's all these different resources that you can use. A lot of them all worked based on the best practices. And you can just find what you need, I would say, with the finding option, because it's going to take a long time to scroll through all of them. But here, for example, I have the 101 storage account create, which has that Azure deploy file. And this is pretty much production ready. You can just fit this to your needs, but these are very clean templates to use. And they are according to best practices. Let's just check real quickly if this one is done. Yes, it is. So my storage account has been created based on my ARM template. So if I close the CLI here or the Cloud Shell and I find example 3, and here is that demo storage account. So this was deployed pretty quickly for me. Now there's a really cool feature in the portal that I want to show, because these are storage accounts and there's not too much going on, but these are all pretty standard storage account. And let's say I have an environment already. I am using this storage account and I will click through this storage account, and let's say I have some configuration changed in this storage account. So I'll click some stuff. I have absolutely no idea what I'm clicking. So I'm hoping it's going to save. Nope. Disable this one. It's always a bit of a gamble to just click some stuff and click save. Don't do this in production. But now I have some settings that are different from a default storage account, or one that a template that I could get from that quick start. And I have some specific settings, and maybe I'll get asked, well, we want this to be an ARM template because we want like 50 of these storage accounts with these settings. Every resource in Azure in the menu has a button export template. And if you click export template, it generates a storage account for you. And I'll just copy and paste this to Visual Studio Code because it's a bit more readable. And I do need to zoom out just a little, so I'll copy and paste this here. And here I get a template with these specific settings. So apparently I click minimum TLS settings, or only support HTTP traffic. I think this HTTPS traffic, I think these are by default. Encryption options, so, and access tier I changed. So what I can use this for is to find specific settings that I need for my ARM template. These generated templates are absolutely not production ready. They are generated. I mean, a parameter like this just doesn't make any sense. Let's be honest with that. But this can really help to find out what structure you need and if you want specific settings. So I can see now if I want to change that access tier to cool, this is the syntax I can use, and I can copy and paste that. And we can take this a bit further because I have now created a storage account. But what if I look here and I'll click away the essentials, and here I have a virtual machine with everything that it needs. I can actually click through and say I want the VNet and the disk and the public IP, but not the network interface or the virtual machine itself. And I also here have the export template option, where all these resources will be created in one template for me. And I can, even if that's enough, if not enough, if I just want the whole resource group, I can say export template, and I get all the information. All the resources in that resource group are now in this template. And like I said, this is not production ready. This is really a generated thing, but this can really help you if you have the resources available and you want to see how you can do specific settings or what the syntax should be, this is a great way to use the portal to do that. And I will say there are so many resources out there. If I need something specific, I will still do this. I will create that resource, create that settings, and check what the expert template says to me. Now, there's one other option. If you're thinking, yeah, that's nice, but I need to have that resource now and then do not want to create resources. Maybe they cost money or you are not allowed to for security reasons. There is another way to use the portal to generate ARM templates. And if you click Add a Resource, and I create a storage account, of course, it will ask me for the basic information. So I can run through this menu, still West Europe. And let's say I change some stuff up. So with networking is fine, and I turn on soft delete and turn on versioning. So I change some stuff off that I would change, that I would set when I'm creating that resource. And as soon as I get to click and review and create, I have the option download a template for automation. So if I go to download a template, it also generates that template for me. And I'll copy and paste this again to have it a little bit more readable. And this is actually a pretty nice template. I'm still not sure how they managed to generate them so clean. These are very clean templates, very usable. The only thing I would say that needs to change if you're using this is that it will create a parameter for literally every setting. And you might not need that, because I could imagine that in your environment, every storage account should only support HTTPS traffic. You do not need a parameter for that. You can do that hard-coded, and literally everything is a parameter. But other than that, this is a pretty clean template that does not have a lot of options that you do not need. So this is also a great way to first create an ARM template and to start working with that. As I said before, this is an example of how you can get started with getting a feeling with an ARM template. It is good to find out what all these settings are actually doing and what you're using them for and what the syntax is. But this is a great way to find out how an ARM template works. And I'm gonna look at the time. Yeah, I have time to show one real cool option I wanted to show specifically for ARM templates. When you start running with it, I would recommend start using Visual Studio Code and the ARM Tools extension, which is the Azure Resource Manager Tools officially. And that extension can really help you out with creating your ARM templates. So if I look here, this file is used by the extension. And if you see, I type A and it suggests I can use ARM exclamation point. So I'll tap complete that. And it gives me the structure of an ARM template. So I don't have to worry about what that syntax was. It creates it for me. So it has some snippets in there. So if I look over here and I make an object, I see some snippets here again. So we were talking storage, ARM storage. And here it gives me the formatting I need for a storage account. I can deploy this if I want this. This is deployment ready. I mean, well, it would fail because I'm guessing someone else has used the name storage account 1 for a storage account, but this is basically deployment ready. So it almost like it creates the ARM templates for me, and it can fix the syntax for me. So formatting is now nice and neat. So this is really nice if you want to build your ARM templates from scratch. And if you think, well, this also already puts a lot of information in there that I wanted to look through myself, you can also take it down a step. And what I would do, it suggests I could create a type. And here it also starts adding the options for me. So Microsoft Storage./storage accounts. Okay, it can all autocomplete for me. And if I type a comma and start again, it will, and this one is really cool, it will start ask me for an API version because that's mandatory with every resource. And you always had to look up on the internet what the latest API version was because you want to use the latest. But here it will show them for you. So I can just go through and say, for example, well, I want to use a preview or not. I can choose one, tap complete, and I know this is an existing API and it will help me create the correct syntax for that. So here it gets all these options and you see I can choose queue, which is specific for a storage account. So it gives me all the options that I need to build this storage account. Get the picture. It tells you everything that you need to do. And it will tell you if you get something wrong. So if you use signs that are not available, I think it should fail if I say I create an API version here that doesn't exist. It will tell me like this is not an API version that we know of. So it will tell me if I do something wrong and it connects to parameter files. So this is really cool tooling. To help if you really start constructing your own ARM templates, even from scratch or not. This is must-have tooling, in my very humble opinion. So these were the ARM templates. So we went to PowerShell, Azure CLI. We went to the Cloud Shell where they all get together, but then in a browser. And we saw some options where you can export a template with ARM templates. Now, there are some sources that I would recommend if you want to start with any of these. The first link, and I will paste that in the chat later, is a GitHub repository I made where all the code that I used is available, and this presentation is available for you. That is AA and then an underscore, make the portal work for you. For the Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI, you can find the repositories on GitHub. This contains all the code for it, all the documentation, and you can also create issues if you find some behavior that you think should be different. One that I didn't mention for this talk because, yeah, it would take a lot longer, is the Azure REST API. Everything that you cannot do with Azure PowerShell or with Azure CLI, you can do with the Azure REST API. It could be a bit harder to get into. That's why I also don't consider it for this talk, but this might really help you out with all the stuff that you cannot accomplish with PowerShell or Azure CLI. And I put a link in here to the ARM template VS Code extension. In my opinion, a must-have if you are working with ARM templates. So that's pretty much it. I have pasted again here the name of the GitHub repository. The name of my blog, where I have a lot of blog posts about this stuff, is forbes4.nl, and you can find me on Twitter or on GitHub if you have any questions at ba4bes.nl. So, no, not .nl, just ba4bes. So I want to thank you all for joining on this, yeah, for me, pretty early time. And I think we have time for some questions if they are there, or otherwise I can just look into the chat.
Thank you, Barbara. What a cool way of kicking off today's event, which is, again, focused on automation with PowerShell and Azure. So it's very, very well timed, Barbara, to have you this morning. So thank you once again for that great introduction. I think it really helps the attendees to really understand how to use these different options. So I think that was really, really relevant. I think, Barbara, there's a question about you sharing the links. Is that possible? Could you share those links in the chat for the attendees? What
I will do, I will share the link on the screen now. And if you go to that link, you can find this presentation. The PowerPoint is in there, or or PDF based on the PowerPoint. So there you can get all the other links that I mentioned and all the code that I work with.
Awesome, fantastic. There is a question, as you can probably see. It was regarding one of the demos that you did asking, can the login process be automated inside the script so they don't need to log in every single time? That's the question that they've been asking in the chat window.
Excellent question. One thing that's good to know, if you're running this interactively, you only have to do that login once and it will remember that login for you. You saw that going wrong with me with the Azure CLI because I haven't used it for a while on this computer and it has expired, the token, but it will take a pretty long time. So you don't have to worry about that login every time. So when you do this interactively on your own computer, it will remember your login from the last time. And if you do this interactively or not interactively, so for a script that you want to have scheduled, for example, or from an Azure DevOps pipeline, you will often create a connection through a service principal, for example. You can store the credentials of that in a key vault or something like that. So you can make a safe connection that way and don't have to pass on your credentials. So for automatically, I would go for a service principal. And if you're running it on your own computer, don't worry, you don't have to do that every time.
Well, there you go. So both Thijs and Barbara, an important concept they've been asking everyone to use are service principals. So it's an important part of automation. And there you go. So in your chat window, if you just follow that link, a lot of people are asking about your code. So if everybody, just be aware that Barbara has shared the link
Almost.
for her presentation. Almost, she's shared it, yeah. So that will be available. So don't worry, Barbara's not going anywhere. You can still get in touch with her. She's sharing her GitHub repository. There you go. So you've got access to that now, everyone. So that's great. So there you go. So there's Barbara's GitHub repo. And people asking, are you on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn. I can set the link there, but I must say I'm more interactive on Twitter.
Twitter,
because
there you go.
LinkedIn, you can follow me, but I only connect with people I know in real life.
So Twitter, there you go. So if you have any questions, there you go. Connect on Twitter.
And you can, if you don't have Twitter, you can visit my blog and leave comments on there or use the form there if you have any questions.
Fantastic. Okay, that was great. So there we go. So I have to say, Barbara, it was also my first time attending one of your sessions. I have to say, very, very impressed, very hands-on. Very practical, so very, very impressed. So again, thank you, the Netherlands, for bringing such great community leaders. Fantastic.
So I think all the links are now in the chat.
Excellent, excellent. Well, there you have it, guys. So there's your, that's a great way to get started with all these different frameworks, which Barbara covered today. So again, big thank you for Barbara for addressing the concepts of the Azure portal, as well as the different methods of automation. And yeah, so I love some of your quotes. So yeah, excellent. So again, thank you, Barbara. It was a great pleasure for you to join us today, this morning. And yes, one thing I think we'll have to remember, just as we see on the screen, one thing we'll have to do is I have to ask you, what is your favorite color for swag?
Purple or pink?
Purple, I was going to say that. So, okay, yeah. Awesome, fantastic. So again, we are giving away swag at this event. All the speakers will be sent swag, and you can also win swag too if you're very highly engaging in the community, asking lots of questions, being active on social media. You will also get swag, including some of these fantastic books. So again, thank you, Barbara, for that fantastic, excellent introductory session there.
Thank you.
And there you go, guys. That was Barbara, all the way from Netherlands. So very, very grateful to have such an international community joining us here today. So before we move on to the next session,